This is our final panel of the day on this particular track. Do make sure that you come back tomorrow. We're going to do not this all again, but a whole lot of new stuff all over again. It's going to be great. So this is a panel entitled "Weathering the Storm: Insights from Mobile Gaming CFOs and How to Prepare for Tough Times Ahead." So we got our panel of experts. Let me have a little look here. I'll leave this one with you. Do take it away. If you need a clicker, it's there. I'm not sure whether there's a presentation, but go for it.
I think we're just going to be talking. Great, thank you for the introduction. So, my name's Macmillan. I'm going to be moderating today, CEO of Pollen VC. Some of you were here for the last presentation, so just like hogging the stage for a little bit longer. So we've got some really interesting folks in the panel today. We're going to try and keep it positive. So what can you actually do as the world is changing, and not just sort of sit there and cry into your pint glass. So here to talk about that with me, I'll let maybe everyone just whistle down the panel and just do a very quick intro to everyone. That'd be great.
Yes, I'm Riley. I'm the CEO of Umami Games, and we make casual puzzle games. And I guess what's unique about us is our strategy towards development.
Hello, I'm Markus from Fingersoft. We do casual racing games, best known for hill climb racing.
Hi, I'm Anton from Play Ventures. Not a CFO, but I deal with them on a daily basis. So we're an investment firm focused on growth companies in the gaming sector.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henri. I'm from Sandsoft. We are a company out of Riyadh operating in Saudi Arabia. We have offices in UAE, south of Spain, Barcelona. We develop games in UK, and we have a publishing function here in Finland.
Cool. Maybe first question for Henri, actually, just because you have the mic, or you had it. Okay. Like in terms of obviously like the macroeconomic environment's changing. We had a 15-year bull run or whatever, where everyone just thought everything was up and to the right for a long time, and then you have COVID and Ukraine hitting in very, very quick succession that is reframing everyone's kind of perception. So, any sort of like high-level thoughts in terms of like, as the world is changing, what's everyone kind of doing to prepare? How, what can you do at a very high level to make sure you come out the other side?
Okay, so let me start from my perspective. So I operate and work in the Middle East. The world looks quite different from that angle. Why it does look so different is that actually there is a lot of job opportunities. Countries are relatively young. For example, Saudi Arabia, the average age of the country is 31.8 years of age. So 70% of the people are under 30. They look at very optimistically and positively the world. We are creating jobs, and the industry, as an entertainment industry and gaming industry, is new. So that gives a lot of positive vibe. It doesn't mean that it makes any workday any easier. The macroeconomic facts are around us as well. But I would say that from a CFO point of view, it's really important to understand your company strategy. There has to be a true unity within the company on the objectives, what you want to achieve, and what you want to measure as part of your success. And then you need to have cash. It is important that you have a runway ahead of you, and you don't end up into a situation where you do just decisions based on the facts that you don't have enough resources, which in this case is money.
Markus, you're nodding. Do you want to take the mic next on that?
Sure. So basically, from our viewpoint, of course, we can see a little bit of decline, of course, in certain markets. But at the same time, of course, I always see like these kind of events and turn of events is like things that build a right kind of culture for your company as well, because they force you to consider about like how when you're planning your operations and anything, you have to be expecting the uncertainty that anything can happen, and kind of rethink as well the operations as well. Like from our user acquisition marketing point of view, we kind of be always like considering like all the new channels, how to reach to the consumer in a different way, for example, because there has been that privacy changes have affected a lot on the acquisition costs of users, for example. But we've been having like really great performance actually. So for the past 6 to 7 months, our ROAS in a year scale for campaigns on average has been 125%, for example. So for us, it hasn't been like that big of a thing. It has just more forced our teams to be really, really focused and not to get into the despair, but be more optimistic and try to find like how to fund the growth.
Are you almost thinking about putting UA in a box and treating that, because it's almost like a little microclimate of its own, right? If it's working, it's working, and you know.
Yeah, and it's very product related as well. Like you cannot take just one racing game like our game and then another racing game like, for example, Asphalt. The audiences and all that, it's quite different. So you have to really know the users and who you're aiming for. So
cool. And then Anton, so I guess sort of double-edged question for you. So like, how are you guys sort of thinking about the market and the changes in the market and the sorts of investments you're looking at? And then the second part of the question is like, how are you translating that into advising portfolio companies you've already invested into?
Yeah, it's definitely a tough one, Martin. So, and I really don't know where to start here. But I think if I sort of look at our portfolio more broadly, and especially if I start, for example, when we're looking at new investments right now. So I think as an early stage investor, as we do mostly pre-seed and seed investing, we do Series A to some extent, but very little. I think a big factor also I think we need to factor in is sort of what are the chances of raising follow-on capital for those companies, because we're still looking at companies having to raise for almost 2 years before there are any sort of scalable product metrics that would warrant for larger investment rounds. And during the bull market, this was definitely this was viewed very differently from downstream investors. Mainly, I'd say there's a couple of specialist funds focused on our level, very industry specific funds focused on gaming startups. But most of the growth capital comes from more generalist technology funds that are very metric and benchmark driven. In a bull market, there's much more willingness to be experimental there and investing in these growth rounds. But now the reality is that sort of I've heard sort of straight comments from these funds that now is not the time to be another word escapes me, but
experimental and
experimental. And really they're sort of clinging to stuff that is very familiar to them. I mean, recurring revenue obviously is very interesting for later stage investors, because that recurring revenue has a good chance of surviving sort of downturns and where there's less spending. What I would credit gaming though for is that even also during the pandemic, we saw good amounts of spending in gaming, etc. So not saying that gaming is recession or pandemic proof, but I think there's also a big educational part missing as well for the downstream investors, and really understanding the nuances of the industry, where a lot of the, especially revenue on the free-to-play side, is of the quality that it's almost the quality of recurring revenue also from SaaS companies. But obviously the margins are behaving a bit differently when you're doing UA at scale. One sort of more top-down perspective that also I want to allude to in your keynote here previously is also what those really late-stage rounds look like for these companies. So if a lot of growth investors were willing to do these large equity rounds to fund UA, and they were comfortable with payback periods of 2 to 3 years and even beyond that, because there was this notion that the further equity funding will always be available. But now I think it's probably more than ever important for these companies to look at alternative solutions like credit facilities and the stuff you guys are also providing, and other means. But then there's obviously some other things now. Before I stop my monologue here for a bit, but also things that the sort of free-to-play is facing here is like, how does Web3 fit in all of this? because it's certainly been very popular in the investor community for the past couple of years, and really trying to find more sort of blue ocean opportunities there, especially in a post IDFA world, where there is at the institutional level increasing worries about, are these models sustainable anymore with the paybacks going beyond 3 years? Are the user lifetimes going to be that long anymore? Will you actually see a return on investment? So I think these are just some of the major themes also early stage investors are pondering about when considering investments in new startups, especially in a lot of red ocean categories within free to play, where we need to evaluate that sort of what are the chances of this company for raising follow-on funding. Naturally, we understand the business model. We understand the potential in these teams and what those games could sometime in the future achieve. But we're also reliant on that downstream capital as well.
So it's something we've definitely seen is you see core gaming investors who really understand they're doing the seeds and the Series A, and then all of a sudden you're like, names you just don't expect to see on cap tables who may be big in SaaS or whatever, and lots of these bigger funds have tried to sort of dip their toe in the water, and it's almost like you can see them with us sitting on the sidelines, but you're looking at SaaS, you're looking at recurring metrics, but free to play is one shot. It's totally dependent on the amount of new UA going into it, and you can't look at sort of the same metrics to value a SaaS company, to value a gaming company. So that's interesting. It's almost like there's a core group of investors that really understand this stuff. But of course, over the last few years, gaming has become very sexy, so all sorts of people sort of want in. And then now I think what seems like the kind of door is closing, and it's almost focusing back to the people, stick to folks who really understand it. The worst thing you can have is running studios, investors who don't really understand your business, because that's when the capital can drop off, and it'll be back to
and I think that's going to be a question imposed by probably most investors, and so how are these companies going to find growth, especially when most actors have been very or almost fully dependent on traditional performance marketing. So if you're a company with organic appeal, for example, now I'm looking at hill climb racing and some other ones too, but also that you're able to prove that you can amplify that growth also with like sophisticated performance marketing, then I think those are very interesting opportunities for growth capital right now, because you have that kind of security from the strong organic appeal. But if there's a way to amplify that, then that obviously it makes you attractive in sort of ways of because the investors, they have these large funds now, because all the funds now are the result of the longest bull market we've ever had. The fund sizes have increased year on year, and the fact is also, which is the light side here, that we all need to deploy this money, and we do have a mandate that within the next 2 to 3 years all of that capital needs to be deployed, and there's a lot of money going specifically into gaming, both on the studio level, platform level, SaaS within gaming, etc., and that needs to be deployed at some point. Deal activity hasn't really picked up in our view yet, as we would have guessed. My personal guess is that we would have seen more deal activity happening already now during Q3, but and now this is only a guess, not advice in any form, but during now the upcoming quarter or Q1, that deal activity should be picking up again at some point, because the fact is that this growth capital needs to be deployed as well.
Yeah, so there's a lot of gas in the tank there, and so there's still plenty of money needs to be deployed, just in the right opportunity. It sounds like the focus is changing. Riley, for you, how are you thinking about it just in terms of your own plans? Are you getting any kind of change of tax or any solid advice from your investors? You're sitting there in the operating seat with lots of different hats to wear. How are you thinking about things?
So I think I see it a little bit as Henri, trying to be a bit optimistic. I think we come from hyper casual originally, so we're used to a lot of market changes constantly. So I think what we have seen is we just need, it is what it is, right? Then we need to work around it. And what we have focused a lot on is the development of the games and focusing more on the early stages. So making sure that once you get to that UA place, you have something sort of as Anton also said, that already caters for a certain virality. Of course, when it comes to investment, I think everyone sort of agrees on it's tough times, right? But Anton also has a point in there are still capital that need to go out, right? So of course, I mean, our investors is a little hesitant in exactly what you say. How do you raise the next round as well, and how do we even raise these rounds, right? But when that is said, I mean, the best teams, in my opinion, it just caters for some new strategies. You need to rethink the way you're doing things, right? And that gives naturally gives opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, my view is that there's always opportunities, right? So we just came back from living in California for 4 years. My single biggest takeaway from 4 years of California living is trying, whatever bad stuff happens, try and figure out the positive from it. So how can you benefit from the downturn? Don't just sit there and be like, well, the market's gone to shit, that's why my company blew up or whatever. You can always take actionable steps. There's always something, in my view, that you can do to turn things round to the positivity. And it may be, unfortunately, someone else's failure becomes your success. It may be something within the company. But I think there are always things to focus on where you can draw the positive from the negative. I mean, the fact we've just had two cycles, two economic cycles rolled into one, the super bear market, obviously stuff is going to change. How what can you use to kind of recalibrate? I don't know if anyone's got any specific thoughts. I'm going a bit off script, but any specific thoughts on that? Anything that they've been able to latch onto that's a little glimmer of hope?
Thanks, Martin. So we looked at the market to recruit, for example, a year back. It was very different. Nowadays, it's easier to attract people to join. First of all, the new innovation. I mean, Riley, you spoke nicely about really testing new game concepts, come up with a concept that actually is scalable. You can go into a marketability testing, get the data out, and you feel more comfortable that your investment, time, resources, skill set, and the opportunity cost of doing something else on top of the money will actually pay back. So I think for many, even the smaller studios, it's really look after the talent. It is a people business, so looking after the well-being of the employees, making sure that there's enough runway, but giving that trust and room to innovate. Because if the triangle of thinking about the game on the top and your user acquisition, assets and creativity, or even the marketing mix on one corner of the triangle, and then finally your user acquisition activities and conversion to a paid user in one. So that equation, instead of going into a blame mode that my game doesn't work, maybe it is a combination of many of these things that needs to be looked into. And at least for me, it's really trial and error, quick learning, fast. And I love Martin, your point of this one, return on the 28 to 30 day window, looking at that one, whatever your metrics is, if it's not the direct profitability metrics, but metrics of for example conversion, really important.
Markus, you wear two hats, right? So you've got the CMO and the CFO hat on, right? So that's interesting. So you're bringing together kind of UA and finance, which is like for us, music to our ears, right? Because it's
risk and return.
Well, exactly. It's all down to that one thing. But in terms of the in terms of the wider, how I don't know, maybe you can talk to how people are sort of, the team. I know you guys focus a lot on culture and so on as well. Are we talking openly about this? Do we have huddles? How are we sort of preparing our teams to think about it?
Well, it's pretty much like clarity and ownership and focus. So basically, we've been focusing a lot on the incentive schemes, making everyone to have stake in the company and everything. We're one of the, I guess we're currently biggest indie Finnish company at the market. 2 billion downloads, and last year it was 24 million euros in revenue. And the growth is, I have been on the growth track for the past 2 years. And also one of the things, I'd say, we trust the teams. So basically all the teams are up on their finances. So that's why it's even possible for me to kind of have this kind of a dual hat, because we do the processes to be kind of so that every team has their own ownership in their finances. And if there's ever a region, like UA, for example, is one of these, as I mentioned, we've been ROAS positive in the campaigns on average. So that's just a happy turn of an event if, for example, UA head Mikko will come to me and say like, oh, Markus, I budgeted this money and we're doing so freaking well that we need to spend more. So basically, we're really adaptive actually, and on the marketing side, of course, like we try to be more holistic. And I love the point that Henri was talking about, like about the optimism and all that. And I feel like especially in our game, it monetizes slowly. It's very fair monetization, so the window can be really slow. Like it can take 6 months that it turns out ROAS positive, but we have a really good tail, so people play it for years. Sometimes people go out and return to the game 2 years after and come playing and spending a lot on them. So they are live services. So that's one of the things that oftentimes teams may lose focus when they're building a new product, especially like I think Riley, for example, one of the key ideas is that you should always kind of consider the unique product offering and what makes the game special, so you never start like chasing some KPIs only, because that can end up that you lose the bigger picture and then it's not gonna end up as a remarkable success story. So that's like I'd say like one of the key takeaways, because back in like 3 years ago, we did a huge investment, which is not huge investment. It was just one more additional resource to the original hill climb racing team, which is a small team. And we refactored the whole code base. And that brought an imminent return on investment, because it became really fun to develop their new content. So a game that's 10 years old got lots of new content, and it became like a startup again, although it's like a 10-year-old product. So people are loving to develop for it now.
But that's something I would say, especially on the product team now. We're a 7-person team right now, so way smaller. But we have found that it's super crucial that everybody understands the vision, which is also why we focused a lot on building like a dashboard and visual tools. So everybody, from the artist to the developer to the designer, understands the vision, where we're going, what we're trying to achieve, and are able to also talk with, because it's so data and marketing driven. So at least for us, the entire team sort of needs to understand what we're trying to achieve. How does something become viral, right? Or what could be viral factors? So at least for us, it's very crucial that everybody really understands the vision, and it will also make. I had an artist the other day saying, no, we cannot do that art style. That's not casual 2.0. So sort of getting the entire team to work together on achieving this goal, I think is a big strength for us at least.
And I think this is, just to add a quick comment there on the headcount and team size, and I think this is a topic that especially European mobile free-to-play companies have been traditionally pretty good at, is keeping the team sizes really constrained. And especially before you find a product that can hit scale. Sort of, I guess the general advice would be, and obviously I can't speak for every investor that's out there, but I think we sort of strongly prefer smaller teams than bigger teams, especially in the beginning, because it's just going to be more people to manage, and especially if now also given the experience that we have in the European ecosystem, that people are able to wear many hats within those teams, and keeping them small, iterate, they're much faster, much more cash efficient, also from the company perspective, and that those big headcounts are likely not gonna woo the investor, but it's almost a positive signal the more constrained you can keep that team. All of course, given that kind of the key talent is in place even within that team.
Well, in Finland, generally, you guys kind of really, were right at the cold face of, the organizational side and Supercell in the early days and so on as well. So lots of learnings about how to do things and how to keep things sort of separated out and not bloated. Yeah, the sort of metric of like, we're 200 people probably just makes investors,
but also keeping in mind that it's a living organism. So I think also what was Supercell's biggest learning probably now because I can speak for them, but from an outsider's point of view, it looked like the biggest learning for them in the past couple of years was to, when you're large enough, to also be able to expand outside of that original thinking of only having 8 people to work on a game, because they noticed that some of their key titles were bleeding because you didn't have enough resources of focusing on live ops and really focusing on that long tail of players. But once they were able to kind of get rid of that mindset that had been a core component of their culture for 10 plus years, it did wonders for the company from that perspective. And now some of those like titles are like super alive and well, because it's also, yes, having that culture from the get-go was a key success factor for them. But the reason they're still a key success factor is they were able to evolve from the thinking as well, and understand what's best for Supercell right now was probably not like the best thing 10 years ago, but now it's the best thing that works for the company.
Right. So that at that level scale, just think of every game as a living, breathing organism, and then feed it, based on what it needs. And I guess that was the same for you, Markus, with Holm Racing, right?
Yeah, that's basically like the product teams are the king, but we also kind of have been like always very flat structured. Leadership team is 3 people, and then team leads are basically the microorganisms that are doing and focusing on their function level, but then of course organizing, instead of not siloing the information, they focus on organizing their work based on the end goals. So for example, monetization and data, and these teams, they work together of course and meet, so it's pretty much the same. One thing that I forgot to mention while talking about the performance side was also like the transparency of financials. Of course, that's something that I feel that it's really important to have. Like most Finnish companies do have that, but it's not the case for, of course, every team, and especially like when investor money is a little bit more scarce, it can be really beneficial to be really open about the financial situations in any company, because that you should give the trust to the whole employees, because you never know who knows who. So it could be that can bring some better possibilities of raising further rounds as well. That came to my mind just now.
Henri, you spent a lot of time here. You were with Rovio. You saw how it's done. Right, you're finished, and then now in the Middle East, were you able to sort of take some of the thinking that was crafted here, and then to export that, if you like?
Yeah, we have also started from a very small team structures, very flat organization. We have, call it a C level, only 2 people, so MD and the CEO. Everybody else is a team lead. We try to create as seamless information sharing, data sharing as possible, financials as we have it, are shared with all team heads. So I do that on monthly basis. That creates an ownership of the budget. Everybody who has a plan, they have also then resources, time, money, and decision-making power to execute those plans, which then makes it easier. It's following, I would say, very international and even maybe Nordic examples in a way that as you keep the team size small, you can make your decisions faster. When we look at the studios, for example, right now, we talk about these very small, 5, 7 team member structures. And even when we go into the work for hire, we like to see those teams to be also close to us and small in size. And they do scale, of course, as the production of the game evolves. So then you have, of course, bigger teams. But I think it's an international business, really.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like, Riley, when you were talking, I was thinking it's like the transparency, the dashboards, the ownership that everyone has, almost that became more acute through COVID if people are remote working. You don't have the formality. If you're just all like, shooting the shit around the water cooler in the office all day, what's going on. But when you're more remote, you have to be more kind of rigorous about it.
Yes, of course. But I think we have been very lucky with COVID and with Umami and in Denmark, and with so it's not been the biggest issue of actually having to work from home. It was actually more the reason we made it was the fact that we could just see that was all the way back from hyper casual. If you don't understand the entire production cycle when you're such a small team, that will not be an advantage to you at all. It will actually be it will be a roadblock, because then people are working. And for example, imagine the creative manager doesn't understand how the marketing and data things around the videos actually work. If they don't know what a click-through rate is or a conversion rate, and then they don't know how to optimize and become better and better. So that was been the key also for our level designers. If they don't understand what a level funnel is and can do basic SQL, how will they be able to be curious about a subject and become better? So we actually created a lot of these visualization, all the tools to make people understand the entire process of development. more than the corona. But sure, of course, that also helps. And also, yeah, I guess working with publishers that are remote, then that has been beneficial.
Cool. And then I guess, Anton, one for you in terms of how have things changed over the last couple of years? You obviously you see some companies do things really well. How do you sort of like share the best practice between different portfolio companies?
So I think on our end, I think we respect the integrity of each portfolio company in a sense that we don't relay information very actively between the companies, because it is obviously in many cases it's sensitive information, it's competitive advantage. It's without going too much into detail, it's a tough nut to crack also for us. But I think what we can't avoid obviously is that subconsciously going through these subjects with the companies, when we have seen from earlier portfolio companies where things have gone wrong and what things haven't worked, and naturally it affects also our sort of modus operandi in how we work with our companies post investment. But we do try to facilitate as much knowledge sharing as possible. I do think that people in this industry are generally very open about sharing best practices, but then again, it's up to us also on an operational level to facilitate that. But especially in times like these, and I think what the first catalyst that we had that created a lot of internal discussion within our portfolio of studios was the IDFA deprecation and how people were dealing with that. So now I think it's more than timely to also like bring this subject also to the table, and naturally the boring part about it is that information usually stays within our portfolio when it could be very useful for the wider industry also to partake in. But I think that's something we just have to figure out how to do that more, that it's a bit more ubiquitous also outside. But a lot of the discussion is happening also between our companies, and they do reach out, they do ask from each other, how are you dealing with this? And I think that works also outside of the portfolio.
Yeah, I mean, people are generally very happy. Obviously, there's the sensitivity around numbers and metrics and secret source. You're not going to do that. But in terms of, and you always see it when people have a collective problem, right? So IDFA, let's sit down and have a powwow about it, whatever. It's a problem for everyone. Same a little bit like in terms of like we've seen companies connecting and say, okay, how are you thinking about this? How are we going to get through the next 12, 18, 24 months? So I think as an investor, sort of like being the facilitator of having the conversation, not trying to broke or control the conversation. Say, you guys, sit in a room, we'll provide the team coffee, and then let's see what we can figure out. And hopefully, then you get the rising tide floats all the ships. Yeah,
exactly. I think the last part you said is kind of the key there, and I think that's the notion you want to instill also with the people you're working with, and sort of maintaining our neutral position with the companies, but also being helpful and sort of putting our experience to use, because that's also what the companies are expecting from us as we're investing in them, that we're also this sort of high-level operational support when it comes to those matters, and because we have a bird's eye view on the industry, because that's where we spend most of our time looking at best practices, looking at trends, but yeah, I think that has been very sought after post-investment from us to get advice to what to do, not like a playbook to what to do, but at least being a sparring partner to the companies in terms of hearing them out and then together figuring out the best practices and what they should do.
To go full circle, you're way better placed as a specialist investor than someone more generic who's probably trying to.
You're too kind, but we're trying to. We're definitely trying to, but I think one thing I can for sure share that I think we have probably brought up with everyone is to sort of tighten the belt, secure runway, etc. Because we don't know how bumpy it's going to be, but it's without being too cliche, it sure is going to be bumpy. So I think that's just the general advice. And I've been also dealing with a bunch of layoffs also from some studios to make sure that the core team is intact, what's needed. so that there's no excessive spending on other things, because I might have a guess when funding activity might pick up, and we can't keep, the same investor won't be funding your company forever, because it's integral to the investor's model as well that they get outside validation on their own investments, and that's a part of that, or the most important part of that is that there's a new outside investor investing into the company. Usually, including us, we do support companies in all future rounds. We do maintain our ownership and invest more capital in each round, but it's super important to have that outside validation for all parties involved. And therefore you can't be relying on your existing investors to only keep the party afloat. Because obviously we're doing that too. We're facilitating bridge financing. We're doing internal rounds, etc. But at some point you will need that outside money, and that's tied to kind of the deal activity generating more, or like the pace increasing on that front, which hopefully will happen sooner than later.
Fingers crossed. Guys, we've 2 minutes left. Whilst we've got these guys here, maybe we open it up and see if anyone's got any burning questions they want to ask.
Anybody out there? I have a mic.
Hi, thanks for the panel. Any suggestions on the runway for any company out there looking to secure the future?
So I think that would be very different from genre to genre. What we have talked about is there's the whole work for hire. Could it make sense to work with someone else to just cover the entire burn rate until you are at a place where it's more open to actually to raise? But of course we are 7 people, so that's an option for such a small team, and not necessarily for a giant one. But that could be. I think there are so many different options.
Depends what kind of plane you've got, right? Whether you've got a microlight or a Dreamliner.
Yeah, no, for sure. I guess it's the $1 million question, but really making sure that sort of only the core team member or the people you need are in place, because naturally, team is everything at that early stage before there is a scalable product in place. So making sure that the core team is intact. I think making sure that everybody's in it 100%, because we've also seen when things get tough that then some people just don't want to be part of those tough times, and those tough times are inevitable if it's a game studio startup, and they're just looking to be a venture-backed company. So making sure the integrity of the team is in place, and not overspending on UA, trying to be smart about the channels, where you can find the best audiences. Again, depending on what you're building. If you're building an indie PC game, it's very different from the mobile free-to-play title.
Cool. Well, we are officially now over time. Thank you very much, guys, for taking part in the panel. And if there's anything burning you want to
we can take one more.
Oh, we can do one more. Okay.
Yeah, cool. We officially knock off in a few minutes' time.
Okay, it was just flashing red at me. I thought.
Don't worry. We're cool.
Hello. So my question is, with the current economy, do you look at different KPIs now when you think of investing in a company? So you mentioned about overspending in UA, but when it comes to retention or monetization, what would you think is a great opportunity with the current economy, like long-term retention or?
I can start this one. So yeah, that's a very good question. So the benchmarks, if we look at stuff like retention that doesn't directly before we look at monetization metrics, then I'd say those are still quite close to what industry standards were pre-IDFA. Obviously, I think there's some kind of an inflation there as well that we would expect from some casual titles, that we see better early retention day by day. But if we look at something like mid-core, then we don't get that smart about seeing the really early metrics, because what we're super concerned about is the targeting. How are they going to find those big spenders, even though there are some encouraging early retention signs? So I think where more emphasis is now definitely placed is on sort of return on investment projects. So looking at ROAS, looking at what are the payback times, and especially as the cohort sizes start increasing. So I think there's definitely more across the investment landscape. There's definitely more. People are a lot more conservative about those, and we definitely want to see, or investors generally definitely want to see very encouraging sort of ROAS metrics so they can see that there's actually going to be a return on this, because still during the bull market there was a lot of funding that was very comfortable with these 2 to 3 year payback times, and even longer ones. And some of the big casual titles we have in the space are seeing those kinds of payback times currently. But then if the user lifetimes don't increase in the same at the same pace, then we maybe don't get the confidence that we're going to see that sort of money back, because now they're not going to be able to raise perpetually more capital to inflict the UA. So I think there, in addition to finding alternative ways to find users outside of traditional performance marketing, is kind of the combination of what potentially could make investors at later stages more comfortable with investing large rounds into scaling up games.
Maybe lastly from Markus, anything that's happened in terms of focus on particular metrics, whatever?
Well, to add on that, I'd say like more focus to look beyond the metrics actually and see at the opportunity size and be more holistic about the view of the investment, and that's like I'd say the main goal. And if we haven't been any more so active on the investment side, but of course like what I definitely look is on the roadmap and seeing the realism on beyond there. So as Anton was mentioning, like the core team or that, there should be a runway of 15 months always, because this is an industry that requires pivots, and if the team doesn't realize to include that in their plans, that's always a big alarm sign.
So we got to wrap it up. That was it. That was the end of this panel and the end of the day. Give it up for Martin, Riley, Markus, Anton, and Henri. Thank you so much for that, guys. That was fantastic.